I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Aisea Laungaue.
What often helps is in that first engagement of like, what do you want to see in the world? What do you think has shaped your worldview? You get into some pretty vulnerable questions like that, because I think that usually in some of those answers are the clues to themes that you can use to kind of build out, somebody's brand. And that works both in a corporate environment and for a talent.
Aisea Laungaue is partner and chief strategy officer at Anomaly Los Angeles, where he's overseen its growth from just himself as the first employee to a team of over 100, serving the likes of General Mills, HOKA, Expedia, and Inspire brands. His team's work has been recognized everywhere from Cannes to Effies, from the New York Post to Vogue. He was previously co-head of planning at Anomaly New York with leadership stints at Saatchi and Saatchi Sydney and New York and creative artists agency in Los Angeles. My interview with Aisea Laungaue is coming right up. But first...
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Joseph Jaffe hosts a great podcast called Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. Joseph, tell listeners what to expect from the show where you're not famous.
Joseph Jaffe is still not famous. It's the daily show for business with a little Wayne's World thrown in for good measure. Since March 2020, I've welcomed over 650 guests, including Dan Pink, Tom Peters, Carol Baskin, Patrick Fabian, Robin DeAngelo, and even the very famous Jason Falls. It's a show about hope, positivity, and optimism, or as I like to say, it's not TV, it's HPO, where you'll get eulogy virtues to balance out my very famous guests' resume virtues.
And where can people subscribe?
Check out youtube.com/Joseph Jaffe is not famous. Find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Joseph Jaffe is not famous wherever you get your podcasts. Enough name recognition for you?
Plenty. And now that you know the name, go subscribe.
Aisea Laungaue, welcome to On Brand.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. What a rousing read of a very old bio, but I'm still excited to hear it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am old.
As I say every few shows, if nothing else, if I can get a professional read on that bio,
yes,
then I've done my heavy lifting for the day.
You sure have. I'm so excited to be here.
So speaking of your bio, now proudly calling LA home, what's your favorite thing about calling LA home?
I have so many answers to this, but my quickest summary is there is this hashtag called Long LA, and Long LA is basically it's a way for you to follow all the conversations on Twitter, now known as X, around why people believe that this city is a city where its many intersections, like we mentioned before in the bio, entertainment, media, finance, are coming together to kind of create new cultural conversations. So not only is this place a beautiful place to be in, don't mind the earthquakes, I find myself so invigorated by being part of a city that is constantly reinventing itself. And that's why I'm so proud to call it home.
I love that. And you talking about the intersection of industries, boy, your experience And I already used up the word boy, so I can't point to boy bands. But when you talk about boy bands, film directors, diet soda, and whiskey brands, some would look at that client roster and think, how do you keep all of that straight? Are there common denominators in working across types of brands?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I found to be consistent, whether you're talking to a record label or a talent or a multinational that makes sodas or whiskeys, is you still have to get to the truth of what your brand is about, and you also have to be really clear about what your business objective is. And so I find that, like, with all of these industries, all of these different kinds of decision makers, the easiest thing is always to come back to what is it that you want to do, and what are you about, and from those two questions, you can usually start to build out and ask better questions as you go along. But I find that the handshake you need usually comes down to those two questions. When you're first engaging with anybody who wants to, get more serious about branding or invest more in marketing, because it's the same job regardless of what category or industry you're in.
It's that's great. I love that. Say more about you've worked with so many content creators in building what are ultimately content creator brands, and that seems like it might be kind of a different spin on the assignments. So as you approach a J.J. Abrams, Sarah Silverman, Michael Cera, who or what are you? What considerations do you bring to the table in developing a content brand around what are ultimately already very well-known personalities?
Yeah, often with any content creator, and it comes down to a question of what their creative vision is. Very few content creators, or very few, I'll just refer to them as talent. A lot of great talent just want to tell their stories. They just want to create more, and a big part of what starts to happen is, obviously, you have bills to pay, you have fans in lots of places, and there's lots of opportunities to commercialize. I think a big shift that has happened is, there was a previous generation of content creators who were afraid of commercializing their name. It was the idea of selling out, which was an antithesis for a lot of celebrities and talent a long time ago. I think in this newer generation, or at least for a lot of talent that are active now, there is an emphasis on, hey, I want to burnish my legacy. I want to be able to have people understand my work and my vision and my voice in the world. And I would also like to commercialize it if possible, and do it in a way that feels organic, and a way that feels as if I am growing my business and my reputation and the trust that I built with my fans. And so I think that that's kind of always the priority I find with talent who are interested in understanding where their content, what their brands are. It's usually a summary of what their point of view is in the world, and what I always tend to counsel anybody, especially in the work we do now at Anomaly, when we are working with a lot of different talent, is, what is your view on the world? It's the single most unique thing about you, and it's the reason why you have this audience. What else can we say? And what else, how can brands or other businesses help you to say what you're going to say or what you want to say? And I find that becomes, the handshake between talent and brands, and also for talent who want to build their own brands.
And that step that you talk about in there of distilling, your personality, and I think that's certainly a common challenge between whether it's a diet soda, whiskey brand, consumer brand, or a personal brand. There's still a very hard step in getting that that can seem, especially when it's part of your personality, putting that to words seems like it could be a challenging exercise. Where do you counsel folks to get perspective on distilling that the right way?
Usually it comes in the matter of, clues that you're able to kind of present to people. I think it's much easier, to be honest, doing this with brands because there's a dispassionate relationship that a brand owner would have, working within an organization and managing a brand. It can be it's a much more involved process, I think, when you're working directly with talent. So I think what often helps is, is in that first engagement of like, what is your, what do you want to see in the world? What do you think has shaped your worldview? You get into some pretty vulnerable questions like that, because I think that usually in some of those answers are the clues to, themes that you can use to kind of build out, somebody's brand. And that works both in a corporate environment and for a talent. So, I find that, usually with these things, people are coming to the table ready and they're looking for an external partner to help them articulate it. So I haven't found any resistance usually when you're having, these kind of kickoff conversations. And so, so I find that it demands some reflection. And obviously, it differs from individual to individual, from organization to organization. But those are where the nuggets can be found. I think the last thing you want to do is come back with external data points, especially for an individual. To say, hey, this is what people are saying about you on Twitter, or here's some some metric on your apparent celebrity. That sort of stuff never usually helps. So I think for me, it's, as with companies and individuals, everyone has a personal philosophy. And when you can ask the right questions to probe people on that philosophy, that's where the clues come from, because they're often, the deeper you go into that question, the more unique and individual, the strategy and the positioning can be. But without that vulnerability, then you're stuck, with something gray, in my opinion.
I like that point on going deeper, because a lot of times it can be easy to kind of glean some basics off the surface, but really going deeper for something that often returns something much more unique to you, and the 1-2 punch in there on, we're going to do that reflection, but then also see if that's supported in the data as well, which I know sounds meat and potatoes in approach, but it's such an important thing. And I think often it's easy to have an either or approach between reflection and research instead of the both and that really needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worry is that, if you're dealing in a category where there are so many players, like a soda or a, whiskey or a travel brand or a shoe, if you're only going to have the external research as your sole basis for how you're going to help someone determine, that when you do a classic sort of, blue ocean, red ocean thing, that might ignore clues that are there are lots of clues hiding in plain sight when, you as some external partner are working with, an organization or a person. And so I just find that, the reflection is just as important, if not more, because I think that those are where the unique clues lie. I think research will, the external bits of research will help you to kind of, get a lay of the land, and that's great. But I don't think that the leaps that you're looking for, or the client is looking for, will always exist there. Sometimes they do. But I've just found in my experience that, there's nothing like a few penetrating good questions to get to something, to get to something interesting, because again, you're dealing in a lot of commodity categories here. And so, everyone in your category probably has the same research deck. and has the same conclusions about your consumer. You know what I mean? And so the only thing that's going to be different is that your philosophy governs the way you choose to look at that data. And I think that like that's where, it just gets really frustrating sometimes when when you encounter brand owners who don't have a strong internal sense of who they are. You can usually tell that off the bat when you're engaging with them.
On Brand will be right back after this.
My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Joseph Jaffe hosts a great podcast called Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. Joseph, tell listeners what to expect from the show where you're not famous.
Joseph Jaffe is still not famous. It's the daily show for business with a little Wayne's World thrown in for good measure. Since March 2020, I've welcomed over 650 guests, including Dan Pink, Tom Peters, Carol Baskin, Patrick Fabian, Robin DeAngelo, and even the very famous Jason Falls. It's a show about hope, positivity, and optimism, or as I like to say, it's not TV, it's HPO, where you'll get eulogy virtues to balance out my very famous guests' resume virtues.
And where can people subscribe?
Check out youtube.com/Joseph Jaffe is not famous. Find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Joseph Jaffe is not famous wherever you get your podcasts. Enough name recognition for you?
Plenty. And now that you know the name, go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. So we've talked a lot about kind of your work at the intersection of marketing and entertainment. In your current work at Anomaly LA, talk about, and you kind of began this conversation at, really kind of that's one of the things that makes calling Los Angeles home so key is that very intersection. But it also seems increasingly that the work that we're doing, I mean, independent of the types of clients that we've been talking about, whether it's sodas or content creators, it seems like that kind of Venn diagram of the marketing work and entertainment work are increasingly overlapping as our creative, as we were talking about, gets taken to market, and our marketing is needing to be a bit more entertaining to really stand out. So how do, in terms of moving beyond the who we've been talking about, when it comes to the what and how we do this, what really are you seeing a lot of in your work with clients today?
Yeah, probably two aspects to it. Just because I'm a planner, so I'm just going to make
You're going to plan your answer.
I'm going to plan my answer, but I think the first part of my reflection of our Los Angeles office and a lot of our different clients here has been that there has been there are a tale of two cities when it comes to marketing. There've been there's a lot of established companies that we work with, and by established companies I'm talking about mature companies in pretty big in well-developed categories, so we're talking like a General Mills or a Coca-Cola, where marketing has a proven and clear role to play within the organization. And as such, there are best practices. There are, there's oodles of data to be able to refer to talk about what works and what doesn't. And then on the flip side, given that we're in California and we're, on the doorstep of Silicon Valley, you have all these emerging companies. These are companies that are often less than 10 years old. And, they are not only working with agencies for the first time, but, marketing is still a relatively nascent capability within the organization. And, and they're engineer-led companies, they're engineer-led companies with a strong sense of, that these are products that can often, change the world. And sometimes they do. And you're talking about products that create markets. So in many ways, they can sometimes defy all the things that we write about, to ourselves in terms of, marketing science, because, who's to know that, a Facebook or an Instagram or a, VR headset, there are lots of different, products that have rewritten kind of the ways to go to market and all that sort of stuff. So it's been an interesting, 7 years with, in building this office up and serving these kinds of two different types of organizations with two different relationships with how marketing works. So I think like that's kind of been my first kind of reaction in terms of the Los Angeles-ness and the intersection of stuff. The second part of it is just that, what I found really interesting is that both, despite these two different kinds of organizations, and of course, as tech has matured a lot, marketing has matured a lot within these types of organizations. Everyone tends to agree around, at least around our client base, around this notion that, people spend a lot more time in culture than they do in these categories. If you think about spirits, people are often buying one bottle of spirit. They're buying one bottle to take home a year. That's not that much time for them to be actively tuned in to what your category is all about. And the same thing with travel. There's one or two big trips that you're booking, which means that you're active in that, you're active in that category once or twice a year. But for the most part, people are, they're in culture though every single day of the year, So I think the thing for us has been, there is an efficiency in figuring out the right way that your brand can partake in culture, because that is where people spend their time. And there's often like those old famous quotes about, people like to spend time with the things that they care about, and sometimes that's an ad. I think less and less so that's been the case. I think there's one pop cultural moment for ads a year, which is Super Bowl. But apart from that, it's very hard for a brand to lead a conversation, unless they get dragged into the conversation in culture and all that sort of stuff. So it's a long way to say that there's been two different kinds of tacts with marketing that we've encountered, but everyone has a very similar point of view about the role that culture can play in helping them to build their businesses. Mainly because so many categories don't have as regular an engagement with consumers as pop culture does and will. And so I think it's become an essential part of everyone's toolkit.
Pop culture and culture in general are powerful, but they can seem scary for brands. Yes. How do we get over the internal, external hurdles that we may have of jumping in to something that could potentially pay off, but seems scary?
What I have found is it was always very surprising to me, for example, kind of growing up and knowing that there were so many aspects of pop culture that brands would stay away from, So I think, rap and hip hop, for example, was just something that many brands did not really embrace as much as they do now. And I think a big reason behind that has been the presence of, more people who are actively participating and shaping that culture in the decision-making halls of these companies. So I think there has been a wonderful generational change that has meant that there are a lot more people now on the brand side who are more in touch, or at least invest in wanting to be in touch with where their potential consumers are. And as a result, I think legal has come a long way as well within a lot of these organizations. So I think I think it may have just been that, there are enough, there's that annoying joke that happens in advertising where it's like a client comes to you and says, show me 3 things that have never been done before, and then show me, 3 examples of other brands that have done it. So it's like, so I think the thing is that there have been enough big companies who've made big bets. And so it's like Sprite sold out when they did their lyrics cans. McDonald's and Travis Scott, so there've been now big Fortune 50 companies who have invested in embracing giant and sometimes controversial pop culture figures. These are decisions that would not have been made even 10 years ago, in my opinion. So I think it has to do with a lot more decision makers who are closer to culture now sitting on the brand side. And also there's just been more proof that, culture can work as brands try to get a little more unconventional in the way that they work with talent and work in with cultural institutions.
That's great, and such a fun story in there as well. I feel like you provided a perfect segue to talk about brands that have made you smile, and I'm excited to hear yours because you asked if it's one that could smile and make you think. So, say more.
Well, it was just, because I was thinking about, there are brands, out there that I think are doing really great work and make me smile. But I think Beyonce and her brand has always made me smile, and it has been a fan since way back. But I think her, the release of this new country album, and a consistency in the way that she is so intentional about each of her works. A lot of them are inspirational, entertaining, and also educational. And so there is a lot of intention in the crafting of this album because of an important message therein, which is that country music and a lot of its roots and origins are Black in ways that a lot of mainstream listeners might not be aware of. And so, she's really deliberate about the types of stories and the types of cameos and features that she has. So, she makes me smile yet again with this new album. But I think the thing that makes me think a little bit is that at the same time, she's launched a hair care brand. And it's one of many brands that she has launched over the course of her career. And I think the thing I find interesting is, to our conversation about content creators and, businesses that they build and all that sort of stuff, I think it was just so interesting that the track record of her businesses are not as successful as her creative endeavors. And obviously that's not any reason for her to stop doing it. But I suspect that it has to do with, there has been some conversation around the fact that, she keeps all her personal stuff personal and makes her quite a rare beast in today's kind of pop culture landscape. And, perhaps that it's because of that lack of vulnerability that, there isn't much left for her brands to explore because she keeps all of her personalness in her art. Whereas, if you think about Kim Kardashian and Skims, or you think about Mr. Beast and Feastables, there's lots of other creators who, bring all of their lives into, their brands. And so anyway, it was a brand that made me smile, but also then made me think because I'm a planner and I like to overthink anything. And so, yeah, I thought that was, that was just something on my mind at the moment.
Yeah. You delivered on It's a Smile That Makes You Think, and I've got the new conversation that I'm going to be having around this as well. In addition to having Cowboy Carter on a repeating loop around the house.
There you go.
Isaiah, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. Well, they're welcome to visit anomaly.com, which is where we have a lot of our case studies and different kinds of stories around the brands that we help. So that's that. And then I'm also on Twitter. I'm not as active as I should be, but I'm there under Aisea, Aisea.
Awesome. And we will link up to all of that, which folks can find in our show notes at onbrandpodcast.com. Aisea Laungaue, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to have a chat.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Joseph Jaffe hosts a great podcast called Joseph Jaffe is Not Famous. Joseph, tell listeners what to expect from the show where you're not famous.
Joseph Jaffe is still not famous. It's the daily show for business with a little Wayne's World thrown in for good measure. Since March 2020, I've welcomed over 650 guests, including Dan Pink, Tom Peters, Carol Baskin, Patrick Fabian, Robin DeAngelo, and even the very famous Jason Falls. It's a show about hope, positivity, and optimism, or as I like to say, it's not TV, it's HPO, where you'll get eulogy virtues to balance out my very famous guests' resume virtues.
And where can people subscribe?
Check out youtube.com/Joseph Jaffe is not famous. Find the show at marketingpodcast.net or search for Joseph Jaffe is not famous wherever you get your podcasts. Enough name recognition for you?
Plenty. And now that you know the name, go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.